This is Tibet in the 1930s, a beautiful isolated land high up in the mountains of the Himalayas, surrounded by the empires of Britain and China, and yet still almost completely untouched by the outside world. Tibet is now most famous for its leader, the Dalai Lama, who was forced into exile nearly 50 years ago. This treasure trove of rare colour films, shot by British, Chinese and Tibetan people who lived through these times, have been preserved by the British Film Institute. These films allow us a glimpse into a world which has almost entirely disappeared, to a time before the Dalai Lama and his people lost their country.
Oh, father. I think my father.
It's now impossible to tell the story of Tibet in Tibet because since the Chinese invasion of 1950, it's become a criminal offence to even discuss Tibetan independence in territory controlled by China. So, to tell the tale of the lost world of Tibet, I've had to come to another country. I've come to India. The Dalai Lama escaped here in 1959 and, along with the Tibetan government in exile, is based here in the Cloud Gange. To understand how Tibet was lost, why the Dalai Lama must live in exile, we have to look back to a time when Tibet was a free nation. This is Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, in the early 1940s. This film is of the main shopping street, known as the Barkhor. Despite being shot in the 20th century, it looks medieval. Hardly surprising, given Tibet's location. It was almost impossible to reach, so it remained frozen in time. Namgyal Takla lived in Tibet in the 1940s.
We had the huge mountains surrounding Tibet. And then we were inside this mountain, isolated. And we had the big Russia, China, Britain around us. And it was the policy to be kept, this country to be kept a buffer state, a sort of a zone where the big powers will not meet. And it was, we lived in the 20th century, we maybe have lived like we were in the 16th century.
Tibetan society was both feudal and deeply religious. Buddhism had a profound effect in shaping its culture and traditions. Ruled by a dual system of aristocratic families and Buddhist monks, the government's main function was to maintain the religious state. Tibet's feudal structure meant that most of the population lived in poverty. Any attempts to modernize or invite foreign influence were resisted by the conservative and profoundly religious outlook. Life in Lhasa was dominated by a huge number of religious festivals, which involved most of the city's population. "68 days of the year were taken up with festivals. Since the Chinese occupation of Tibet, all of these festivals have been banned. Even though life for exiled Tibetans has changed enormously since the Chinese invasion, Tibetan society is still deeply religious, and Buddhism is central to its culture. Tibetan prayer flags still hang in holy places. Each time the wind blows, the prayers that are written on them are released into the universe. Their colours are symbolic. They represent water, fire, earth, and air. Buddhism arrived in Tibet in the 7th century AD, about 1,000 years after it started in northern India. Focusing on spiritual development, all Buddhists believe that the road to enlightenment lies through the practice, the development of morality, meditation, and wisdom. At the time these films were made, monks made up 20% of the male Tibetan population. Every Tibetan family, rich or poor, sent their youngest son to a monastery as a spiritual and religious duty. Because monks had a high social status, poor families gave up their boys in the certain knowledge they would be looked after financially for life. These boys would just have arrived at the monastery. Even though in theory they could give up being a monk if they wanted, they'd expect to stay there for the rest of their lives. The present Dalai Lama, who is the 14th, was found while he was still a small child. In a tradition that dates back to the 17th century, the Dalai Lama, or Ocean of Wisdom, is both the spiritual and secular leader of Tibet. All Buddhists believe in rebirth and reincarnation, but for Tibetan Buddhists, the man they call His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, is very special indeed. Some see him as a man-god. All believe he's a reincarnation of all 13 previous Dalai Lamas, and he's a bodhisattva of compassion, an enlightened being who's chosen rebirth as a human being so he can be on this world to help others. When the 13th Dalai Lama died, his reincarnation, a 3-year-old boy called Tenzin Gyatso, was found some 600 miles from the capital in Amdo, a province in the far northeast. While the Western world was at war, the family made the long journey to the capital, Lhasa. The 14th Dalai Lama arrived in October 1940. By now he was 5 years old. He was accompanied by his father and mother and 2 elder brothers, Lobsang Samten and Gyalo Thondup.
Oh, father. I think my father. Father, yes. Oh, my mother. Oh, this is elder brother, whom I bully. My mother, very, very gentle. Almost I never saw her sort of the mental state of temper. I never saw. Very gentle. Always smile. Something very, very nice woman. A villager, uneducated. At the beginning, illiterate. Later, with her own effort, she can read some books. Now here, yes, my father with mustache. He very much interest keep his mustache very, how to say, very organized way. No, not like that. So he used, of course, our family from time to time eating meat with bone. So every time from the bone, there is something, what called marrow or something. Oh. So see, he usually used to put on his mustache, then do like that.
Although the young Dalai Lama was revered as a god king, he would not take up his position as head of state until he reached 18. Years of monastic study lay ahead of him. Buddhism involves training, transforming the mind so as to have a full understanding of the true nature of existence, to gain happiness and ultimately to achieve spiritual enlightenment. Buddhists believe it's only possible to escape suffering, to find true happiness by giving up all worldly desires and by accepting the transitory nature of life. all things change, come to an end. Don't try and hang on to things. Also, one has to understand that all one's actions, one's karma, have consequences for good or for ill. If you do good things, then you get merit and, I suppose, hurtle towards your own enlightenment. But more to the point, do good things and the world benefits. You put positive energy out into the world. The events of Buddha's life and teachings were celebrated through ceremonies and rituals that dominated life in Tibet. The Malam Chenmo, or Great Prayer Festival, is a series of events which commemorates the day when Buddha preached the Dharma, or sacred text, for the first time. The festival starts when the monks take over the running of Lhasa from the government. The proctors of the Tibet-1 monastery arrive carrying heavy silver maces to demand that power is handed over to them by the Kashag, or parliament. Their attendants ceremonially throw down the whips of the city magistrates and bow to the proctors to formalize the handover. The proctors are accompanied by the Dobdobs, or monastic police, huge monks who carry long sticks and whips. Wearing padded robes, their job is to intimidate and control the crowd of 20,000 monks who flood the city for the festival. For the next month, the proctors are able to impose fines on the general public for having a dirty house, for using bells on a horse or mule, for women not wearing a headdress, for the wearing of foreign shoes, or any other disorderly behavior. Gifts of money and food were handed out. While the event was mostly funded by the government, there were contributions from the British and Chinese trade missions based in Lhasa. At this time, the Chinese were happy to support religious events. The Tibetan government was dominated by a group of aristocratic families. There were about 200 families who made up the civil service, and each of them had to provide a son to serve as an official. Within the aristocracy, there were 30 higher status families who had the most senior positions. Namgyal is from one of these families, the Sarongs.
Oh, that's our house, the house I was born in, the Sarong house. And that's my aunt, Kukula, and that's my mother. They're really modeling away. It seems quite strange that they are modeling, because we never even heard of this in Tibet, nor did anybody do that, you know. It seems quite strange. I'm sure Auntie Kukula must have arranged this. And I don't know who took the picture, but it's very beautiful, very beautiful. I think they had a British governess, and so she must have taught my mother how to walk, because I can't imagine my mother, you know, sort of showing her clothes. Yeah, they're wearing the Lhasa ceremonial costumes. Kukula is considered very beautiful, and she's really beautiful in here, I must say. And you notice here, this is also in our garden. We had one of the best gardens also in Lhasa, because my grandfather himself, he worked in the garden, and also he made all the family members come and work. And each child had a tree. We had to water the tree, fertilize it, and we were only allowed to take the fruits of that tree and no fruits from the other trees. So we had strawberries, we had gooseberries, we had pears, everything. In this picture, you see my aunts together with my grandfather. They had the same father, Sarong, but their mother, they had 3 different mothers. They were 3 sisters from the Sarong, original Sarong family.
This sort of family structure was not unusual in Tibet. Men could marry a number of women, and even women could marry a number of men.
The reason is to keep the family wealth together. Married out, the brothers had several wives. There are bound to be troubles, and then they might say, okay, we want to separate the land. So they usually had brothers marry one daughter, or the daughters marrying several brothers, so on. It was very common. Divorce did exist, and usually what happened was during marriage, there is a contract made. And then usually most of the divorces, the wife would be well looked after when she leaves the home. And if there's a son, the son stays with the father and the daughter stays with the mother. So there's no custody of children fighting about it. Automatically, the daughter goes to the mother, the son goes to the father. They could also remarry. We had no problems about divorcees or widows remarrying. In fact, if they were younger, they were encouraged to marry.
Tibet's feudal structure meant that most of the population lived in poverty. Ordinary families were reliant on the landowners for a living. They were effectively owned by them, and each family had specific jobs they were born into. Phuntsog Sering's family were tailors for one of the aristocratic families in Lhasa.
I come from a tailoring family. My father and mother were both tailors, and they trained me. Now, these are the costumes for the aristocratic ladies. In terms of design and patterns, these outfits are type worn by the aristocrats, but they're really quite similar to those that more ordinary women would wear. There was summer and winter wear, and these outfits are for the winter. These are definitely winter wear. You can tell by the length of the sleeves. When it comes to making these costumes, we did everything by hand. In those days, we didn't have sewing machines in Tibet. But for a tailor like me, it would take about 2 days. That's right, I could complete something like that in about 2 days. These are the costumes of the Kashak, and they are relatively easy to sew. All of the aristocrat costumes were made of brocade, but the type of brocade, in terms of color, shine, pattern, and quality, would again depend on their rank. If we were making something for government civil servant, the design and pattern would depend completely on their rank and status.
Shuo Lobsang Darji was a junior rank civil servant in the early 1950s.
The higher ranked officials had a huge number of costumes they had to wear, while the lower ranks had far fewer. One of the original ancient costumes that was traditionally worn on official occasions is called the Galu costume. And I have worn that costume myself. I was one of the lowest ranks, like the 6th or 7th grade, and we all wore the Galu. It was the same color for everyone. But for day-to-day wear, I wore the native Nambu outfit, which was made of black or brown woolen cloth. A unique feature of the costume was the yellow hat called a bokto, which was worn by every grade of civil servant. As for the length of our hair, everybody just let it grow. Some had it down to their waists, some a bit shorter. You let it grow to its natural length and you never get it cut. I used to have hair down to here in those days. It was very long and very thick. The top knot or pajok were very fiddly to do. They would take ages, but once you got used to it, you could do it yourself. If you were in a hurry, you would need help, especially with the braiding. So you would teach your wife how to do it, and she would help you. Later, you could call in a professional hairdresser who specialized in braiding, and they were very skilled and therefore quicker. Most men and women had long hair. Of course, the monks didn't, because they had to have their heads shaved. Everybody else grew their hair long.
this massive civil and monastic bureaucracy within Lhasa was about to be led spiritually, if not politically, by the 5-year-old Dalai Lama. Before his official enthronement, he stayed at the summer palace, the Norbalinka. At first, his family were also allowed to stay there too, before he began his new life.
Of course, at that time, my mother and father and my elder brother remain or stay with me. Then mother and father, I think every day used to come to see me. And also I also used to visit to their home. I enjoy my native village's food.
While pilgrims came from all over Tibet, foreign dignitaries also paid homage to the God King. The British political officer in nearby Sikkim brought a movie camera with him and managed to get this first ever moving picture of the Dalai Lama. Sir Basil Gould, seen here with a white prayer scarf around his neck, also brought an expensive foreign toy car for the little boy. But already his status set him apart from other children, and only his older brother, Lobsang, was allowed to test drive it.
Oh, this is my brother, elder brother. So the people felt if I handle, maybe too risk. So my elder brother, let him, you see, play. Sometimes I feel a little jealousy.
Somebody's in the car. I wonder if that is my husband. It's him?
Namgyal married the Dalai Lama's older brother, Lobsang, in 1962.
There's Lobsang on the horse now. I see him. Lobsang's so serious. I can't believe it. He looks so serious in there. He's not a serious person, but in there he looks so serious. Now that is a very nice picture, yes, of Lobsang's father with his mother going in front of him. One wonderful thing about my mother-in-law, which I really admire, is she loved wearing her own simple jewelry and the dresses. She was a wonderful person, very simple, from a small village, but she was sort of always so kind to everybody. If somebody, a beggar, came to the home and asked for something, she'll ask the cook to please feed the person, whoever it was. And she was really kind to everybody. Wonderful person.
The date for the 14th Dalai Lama's enthronement ceremony at the Potala Palace was reached according to complex astrological calculations. The distance between the Norbalinka Palace and the Potala is only a few miles. The Dalai Lama will be accompanied on this short journey by the whole of his monastic and civil retinue. The 13-story Potala was originally built in the 7th century. It's a quarter of a mile long with over 1,000 rooms. It was the winter residence of the Dalai Lama, a centre for religious worship and training, as well as housing Tibet's government and huge civil service. Tenzin Gyatso was enthroned as the 14th Dalai Lama on the 22nd of February, 1940. A life of austerity and strict scholarly pursuit began for the 5-year-old and his brother Lobsang.
Well, I think for him, being a normal child and then suddenly becoming a monk and then coming up to Lhasa with His Holiness and leaving the parents and then suddenly going into this huge Potala palace and living there amidst the older monks who can be quite strict. And he used to often tell me it wasn't that pleasant there.
The elder brother stay with me. We always play. And sometimes I bully on him, although he's older than me.
He used to talk about His Holiness being quite naughty and mischievous. And then when he was naughty, his tutors used to frighten Lobsang. And then he said, then His Holiness, he used to get into a lot of very nice games, running around, and then feeding the birds outside on the roofs. That was the greatest fun. Here were these two little boys with the older attendants and huge dark rooms, and it was very frightening for them. And I mean, coming from a village where you had a lot of running around, freedom, and then suddenly you are put there, it must have been quite intimidating for him.
So then I think once a month, my mother came. So when my mother came, I feel very happy. Then my mother about depart, I feel little uncomfortable, little sad.
While the young boy studied, a monk regent took the role of Tibet's temporal leader until the Dalai Lama reached the age of majority. Regent Retting, seen here with his enormous bodyguard, Utugba, oversaw much of this power vacuum, but his regime was seen as corrupt. He was displaced and then imprisoned after an attempted coup. He died in jail. The Dalai Lama had to wait to take full political power, but as the country's spiritual leader, he acted as a figurehead. One of the 5-year-old's official duties was attending cabinet meetings. His strict routine only varied for the important festivals. The festival of the votive offering took place in the eastern courtyard of the Potala Palace. It was a deeply significant solemn occasion in which all the sins and bad events from the previous year were purged, clearing the way for the next. The yellow-hatted monks of Dalai Lama's own Namgyal monastery join the government and civil officials as they prostrate themselves in front of His Holiness. Watching from the top floor is the Dalai Lama. The main event of the votive offering is the Chum, a tantric dance. Accompanied by drummers and trumpets, dancers emerge into the courtyard. They have spent many hours in meditation, envisioning themselves as a deity they're about to perform. Uza Naring Tashi was one of these dancers and later taught Chum dancing.
Now here are the Chum dancers making their entrance. I have performed this dance myself. This is performed on the last day of the Tibetan calendar year. As the New Year is approaching, it's performed as an auspicious ritual to make sure that during the following year there is enough rain when we need it, that no misfortunes happen, that we are protected from any negative forces, and that there is peace in the world. That's why we perform the Cham dance. This one with the horns in the middle is the principal character of the Cham dance, the Tamjin Chögyal. Ringed around him are 22 black hat dancers and 16 masked dancers. Teaching the stag dance is very difficult, especially as they start as young boys. I found it very hard myself. Although he looked like an adult, he's actually a boy. He would probably be about 12, 13, or maybe even 14. I remember being very anxious and scared during the performance in case we made a mistake, because if you got anything wrong, discipline was very strict. Even if you made a tiny mistake, you'd be punished. Only young boys are agile enough to perform this. Your Cham teachers train you. Because the training involves a lot of kneeling, you'd get lots of cuts and bruises on your knees, and you'd get beatings too. Only through such strict training can you achieve perfection. When we began our training and were learning how to do the black hat dance, the repetitive arm and leg movements made you very stiff. So stiff that it would be really uncomfortable to sit cross-legged for the prayer sessions. The costumes were very heavy and difficult to wear, but if you didn't wear them, you'd look too puny. You wouldn't look the part, so there was padding to beef you up. You'd get very stuffy inside the mask. The performance would last 3 hours, and the whole affair would be at least 3 hours.
At the end of the ceremony, a cathartic fire purification rite is performed to ensure that the last traces of evil are dispelled.
Now you can see they are heating up oil in a cauldron. Later they'll add home or alcohol. In this ritual, you fill a human skull with alcohol, and then you pour it into the boiling oil.
Tibetan Buddhism differs from other types because it has its roots in the traditions of the earlier Bon religion. Therefore, there's a belief in gods and celestial beings, and also there are various traditions that involve all Tibetan society in the practice of Buddhism. Now, Tibetans believe that their prayers can be given added power by being conducted by means of a prayer wheel. Here's a prayer wheel. Walking round the wheel means that my prayers have the power, all the written prayers inside this wheel. Incredible. Also, there are flags and beads which have a similar thing, prayers through repetition. And the mantras are used to really gain merit and to help one on one's path to enlightenment. Prayer wheels can contain up to a mile of written prayers. They are symbolically recited with every turn. Pilgrims earn merit and concentrate their minds on the mantras they're reciting as the wheel turns. The circular 5-mile walk which surrounded Lhasa was known as the Linkor. On the festival days, pilgrims would start walking early in the morning. Artemisia, scrub rhododendron, and juniper twigs were burnt, and the air would be filled with incense. A new Linkor has been created at McLeod Ganj. It surrounds the Dalai Lama's own residence up there. This replaces the sacred path lost at Lhasa. Pilgrims now walk it. This is a particularly busy day. It's a festival day. These days, I say, they just walk it. In the past, pilgrims would prostrate themselves along the route, and that was done rather like this. One simply stops, says a prayer, and then one measures one's length on the ground, right way down to the bottom and up again. And so one goes, right around the path. I put my feet where my head was and down I go again. Difficult process, but it was to show respect and compassion for all thinking beings, to remove negative forces and to gain merit, to help one on one's path to enlightenment. Jampa Chodron was a young nun living in Lhasa at the time.
This is the Linkor, the long circuit just beyond Chokpuri Hill. The shot is taken of the section just below Chokpuri Hill. There used to be people carving mantras on stones, making clay statues, and many places where you could make incense offerings. There would be many people walking the Linkor. Down here, there would be people doing the half sideways prostrations as well as the forwards prostrations. I didn't manage to do any sideways prostrations, but I managed to do one circuit doing the forward prostrations. Here they're making the descent. Sometimes when you're prostrating here, you would nearly fall down. I did a lingo circuit. I took 6 days and morning. In the midday sun, you couldn't do the prostration, so you would have a rest. Friends would bring you a meal, so you would have a lunch break. People would normally get up early and start at dawn.
Jampa Sultram and Tenzing Choni Tara also did the Lingkor circuit.
When they used to do the old Lingkor circuit, it used to take about 2 hours. But during Buddhist festivals, people weren't satisfied with merely walking it. They would prostrate themselves all the way around. So, as we were talking about this yesterday, it turns out that we both happened to have done the full body-length prostrations and made the full circuit. It would vary how long it would take to do the full body-length prostrations, depending on the individual. The fast ones would do it in 3 to 4 days. Others might do it in short stages, so it would take about 7 to 8 days to do the full circuit. Wherever you ended the day, you'd leave a mark, and then you'd resume from there the next day. He said yesterday he did it in 4 days. The reason for doing the prostrations is to accumulate merit and to cleanse yourself of your negativities. It's an entirely spiritual activity.
Now here are some pilgrims who have come from villages far away. They have come for the Malam festival. You can see that they are carrying their provisions in bags on their back. There were people coming from all different directions. Some would beg, some would offer prayers, and some would give alms to the beggars. One was free to do what one wished. You would give soap, tea, or money to earn merit. There is somebody ladling out some tsamba for the beggars.